It's
This is great because there's so many people that are joining us today. Thank you all and so much for being here. Okay.
okay. So let's start. Jane, if you could do us a favor and first share with everybody about your history of listening and really connecting with people through their stories. And I think that is where this conversation should kick us off.
That's a very good question. As an interviewer, that's the main thing you need to do. And I have an unusual interview style. My husband teases me and says it's the Larry King style. Larry King would go into an interview knowing nothing. And people would say, you need to talk to so-and-so. And I'd say, okay, can you help me set it up? And then they would. The next morning, I'd be at that person's house or they'd be at my house. I didn't Google them. I didn't ask people about them. I didn't do research. I just sat. And the first question I ever asked is, how did your family come to Hawaii? The stories of immigration from all over the world were just fascinating. And then I would hear about their ancestors, their names, dates, who they married, the ethnic mixes, the things that they did to make a living, how they became acculturated into Hawaii society, what they contributed. And then we would get down to the person I was interviewing. And sometimes we would get down to the next generation of what their kids had done. It was fun. And I put myself completely aside. And I want to say, sometimes people ask me a question as though I know anything. I don't know anything. I'm just the collector of stories. And then I assembled them into a book and took vignettes from many different interviews and put them into like chapters. And so that's how I just listen to the people.
You know, in Hawaiian storytelling, the word is mo'olelo, yeah, and you are basically an expert, really, in mo'olelo, and that the word breaks down even further to mo'o and olelo. And olelo means to speak or language, and mo'o means succession, like the spine on the mo'o's back. You can see how each generation takes the lessons that are shared, the language from the before. What is their job now? Is to pass it on to the next generation. And
Max, that's a very good definition, and this seems to be a lost art in some ways. For example, the reason that I wrote this story to begin with was because I didn't understand what my father had done in his work life, and I wanted to know more about that. I think there were reasons why he couldn't tell me things he was doing. One is I was a child and I probably wasn't very interested in the details of corporate law. Another is that he was under privileged communication a lot of the time and he couldn't share with me what he was working on. And then secondly, would I be interested? But now I'm very interested. And I urge parents to tell their children what they do, what their grandparents did, and how the lineage has been passed down. One of my friends who is into the Hawaiian culture was explaining to me, there's another word, maybe you know it, Max. It means go full circle. You start by learning one thing. Do you know that word? Oh, I can't remember what it is, but you start and you go full circle and then you come back to where you started. And so as I was taking the genealogy, I would start with how the people got to Hawaii, and then I would end with what the people who came to Hawaii had done. And we went back and did some homage to the ancestors. Very touching.
And that's what's so beautiful, is that everybody has an opportunity to connect, with their ancestors, their kupuna. So thank you so much. Well, I know this might be getting ahead of ourselves, but maybe before you answer this question, what would be, I want to ask, what was your favorite story or your favorite encounter with someone you're interviewing, perhaps? Not so much with what they said, but how the interview went.
That is a good question. My favorite moments were the ones where the grown men who are quite prominent in our community were brought to tears by talking about their treasured memories of their ancestors, their mentors, the people who helped them get where they got. We'd be sitting there crying together. And they'd say, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And I'd be saying, "I'm not." and what was so amazing to me is that many of these people knew of me possibly, or knew my family name maybe, or knew somebody who connected me to talk to them, but they didn't know me. So I show up, I'm a total stranger. And within minutes, we're like family. And it was very dear. And so that was my favorite part. Then, as you read the book, you'll see people told me very precious things. I don't know that there's anything in there that's never been told before, but who's been listening to the elders? And I started out by interviewing the people who were in my father's generation because I knew they'd be gone soon. So that's another thing that touched me very much. And for them to be listened to, we'd sit for an hour, 2 hours sometimes, and I would just be listening to their story. And it was so touching. And then to go further with your question, there was a man, he's the very last chapter of the book. And after I turned off the recording, we'd been talking 2 hours, and I had a wonderful connection with him. Again, somebody I had never met before. And of course, afterwards, I'm best friends with all these people. So the recorder's turned off, and he says a throwaway comment. He says, "I can sum up my whole life in one word." One word? I say, "What's that?" And he tells me, he says, "You know, in Hawaiian, we have can and no can." He said, "No matter what's asked of me, I can. This is what I have learned." And that's the last story of my book, and I encourage you to read it because it brought both of us to tears again. Tears are just streaming down our face because it was so beautiful. So those are some of my favorite experiences.
So you talked about a recording device. Tell us more, maybe the technical, like step by step it took from you to typically engage with the interviewee, and then your process of taking that all the way to a chapter, another voice included into
This is a wonderful question. Nobody's asked this question. Oh, I have to do a shout out to my buddy Bob Gaffney, who is listening here. Bob worked with me in Texas. We were on a historical commission together, and he was like my tech support guy. And when I got frustrated, he'd listen to my woes and he would keep me grounded. And basically, the technique is you make an agreement to talk to somebody and you have them sign a release. And hold on a second. There are a few things happening here. Just hold for a moment.
Is there a way they could set up?
Okay.
Is there a way they could set up maybe down there? Instead of, yeah. Okay.
So anyway,
Yeah.
Shout out to Bob for helping to keep me grounded.
Thanks, Bob.
So we get a person to agree to an interview, and then I have them sign a release. So we have a lot of noise going. We have some fantastic musicians who are going to play music for us, and you're all invited to stay online to hear these beautiful Hawaiian musicians for the hour after this if you want to. But this is an old building, and there's some noise from the rafters upstairs as they're setting up. So just forgive. We're having fun. So first you have a person sign something, and then you just begin to talk, and they share their story. And then afterwards is Marcia here, my transcriber? Marcia Smith, is she online here? I don't see her. But anyway, Marcia was invaluable. I'd send the whole audio to Marcia, and she would transcribe it. And then it comes back, and I edit it to make it readable. Then I send it to the person and say, "Do you like it? And will you make any corrections you wish?" And then they do. And then I have them sign off again. So I have all my interviews legal. And the technical part, okay, I go visit a friend one time, and I've got my little recorder, my little pocket recorder, and I'm all nervous. She says, "What are you using that for?" And I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "Well, just get out your iPhone and press memo." So I do all my recordings on my iPhone. And when I finish them, I save them, I send them to the cloud, send them to my computer, and there they are. So It's not as hard as you may think. And if any of you are wanting to interview anybody, you can do it on your iPhone.
Well, we have you to really teach that skill, you know, and I think that might be maybe the next step in being able to share this type of process with people and to have them start with their own families, really.
It's a great idea. And I've been invited by University of Hawaii. They have an oral history department and a sociology department. And they asked me to come up and do a brown bag special. And I'm going to be honored to be able to teach some young people possibly how to take oral histories. Yeah.
So it says in your beautiful photo on the back cover of the book, with your career as a licensed professional counselor, can you share with us the technical skills from your career that I see possibly prompted this type of work? Is there anything you can share about that?
You're good, Max. That's a great question. I see my professional skills. Okay, I'm going to start. Max is Mama's here, and her name is Dawn. Tell us your last name again.
Mukai.
Mukai, right? Mukai. So she runs the store where I'm going to be speaking next week. And when I came in here, she said, my favorite story was the story of you sitting at the dining room table with your family. That's early on in my book, I talk about that. I am convinced that the reason I can do what I do in terms of engaging people is I learned it at the dining room table. We all came with a story to tell, and we all listened to everybody else. And so not only did we talk, but we listened. So I learned those skills early on. And in therapy, you need to set yourself aside. This is not about me. It's not about my problems. It's not about my opinions. It's about you, what you experience, how you're going to come to think about it so that you can have a healthier life. That's what therapy is all about. And oral histories is not about me. It's not about what I've done. It's not about what I'm interested in. It's what you've done and what you're interested in. So my job is simply to sit and bring the best out in you.
And that must have been, okay, with that said, what was one interview that could have gone better?
Well, I interviewed an elderly, beautiful Hawaiian woman whose family has done a lot. She's associated with the fish ponds. She lives in that same region in Hawaii. There's from the mountain down to the ocean. It's called the Ahapua, right? And this was her family, and they were the people who would manage that area. And I wanted her to tell me something about her family's connection with the land and the fish ponds. And I couldn't get there. She told me about her father being a dairy farmer. She talked a little bit about her husband. Her son is very famous. And we didn't need to talk about him because he's so famous. Everybody knows him already. And I wanted it to be about her and her family, but I couldn't get there. So that made me sad, but I'm still have the honor of having to go. I met her in her house. I took her a little bouquet of flowers. She served me some cookies. We just had this moment. So I'm very grateful for that.
Well, don't worry about it. That's very Hawaiian style too. Ask the same question 10 times and they're answering 10 different answers that weren't anything to do with the question you asked. So that's just another thing you have to navigate.
I might also say the people were very modest. There was not one single person I interviewed who said, yeah, I'd be the perfect candidate. Everybody said, oh, I don't have a story to tell you. You won't learn anything from talking to me. My story is not very interesting. And then I'd come away honest to Pete. I say this in the book. I had a lot of supporters on this, but the two that come to mind are my brother John, my sister Kay, and my friend DC Mist, Eichelberger. And when an interview was over, I would call one of the three of them and I'd say, that was the best interview ever. I'd say, I'm so full. I don't know how I could have learned more or been more touched. And then I'd go to the next interview, which was sometimes that afternoon. And then I'd have to call again and say, no, this was the best one. The project of taking these interviews was the most fun I've ever had in my life. Most fun. And then, of course, the process of putting the book together, that was different. I was sitting alone at my desk, taking all these varied bits of information and passion pitches from people and trying to organize them and put them so they'd be readable, digestible, and keen. And so that took a lot of creative ingenuity on my part, and it was fun, intellectually stimulating.
If, just because I was pulled into the project this morning, which I'm so happy to be here.
Aloha.
If you could maybe share, what's the chronology of the book? Is that something you want people to know maybe beforehand? Is there any insight? Or is it just like your interview style? Don't go into knowing anything and see what happens.
People don't need to know anything to read this book. And I want to give a shout out to my sister, who's right here. We're all looking at her. Everybody writes a little review. I mean, not a review, but they send me an email. Make K big here for a minute. They've sent in a little review saying, oh, I've enjoyed reading your book. This is what I like about it. This is what it reminded me of. And Kay says, this is a perfect bathroom book. And I thought, oh no, that's not good. And then I thought, it is, because you can read this book in as much time or as little time as you have. And it's not sequential. You don't have to remember the plot. Pick up any part of it that you want. So I think that answers your question, Max. It's a perfect bathroom book. And she said she's trying to make it eke out as long as she can because she doesn't want it to be over with. And I take that as a high praise.
Okay, so again, audience, if you have questions, please engage with us. And then for our friends here, please, any questions, the floor is yours to chime in. I have a first one here from Anne. It says, how did you know when it was time to stop interviewing since everyone has a story?
Oh, that's a great question. Anne, you see her there, Anne Weisgarber is a friend of mine from Sugar Land, Texas. We got a little music noise going on. Hold on a minute. We have a little echo. Okay, I think we're going to fix it. So Anne, thank you for joining us. Anne has written 3 historical novels, and she's the real deal. She does all the research, and her research is all accurate. I just talk to people and tell what they say. How I knew it was over. I'd been doing it for about 2.5, close to 3 years, and I was close to signing the contract with the publisher to write a book about, I knew not what. I didn't know what I was going to put in the book. But I knew that I had enough material. And I went, Neil Hannes was the very last person from Kamehameha Schools, used to be with Kamehameha. He was my last interview, and it sort of put a period at the end of it. And my trip was over, one of many trips I'd made to Hawaii over the years. And I thought, that's it, time to write the book. So I don't know how I knew Anne, I just had a sense. And I do want you to know that I can't stop myself. I've already started taking more interviews. I don't know if there will be more Voices of Hawaii or not, but I've got stories collected already. For example, one of the stories I collected was a man who mills wood, and out of that wood he calls himself a tone wood producer. He makes the wood that goes into acoustic guitars. What a cool story is that? And it's all Hawaiian wood. So that's one of them. Another is I talked to a botanist, and he told me all about bonsai and all the lessons you can learn about living through the art of bonsai. Ah, fascinating.
How many cultures do you think are captured in this story?
In this
That you
story?
read together?
Well, the Haole perspective is caught by many people who were doing business in my father's era.
Okay.
Then I interviewed people with Hawaiian heritage, Japanese heritage, Korean heritage, Chinese heritage. I'm missed Filipino because nobody came into my orbit that had that genealogy, but I'm open. So there are many more stories to be told and many more ethnicities to discuss.
I'm going to be the voice from out of the frame for a minute, just to.
Let me say, this is Miley Meyer, who went to Punahou with me, and she owns this store and helped arrange this.
Wait, do we have the other throw? I apologize. Or do you have the?
There's Miley behind Max.
Hey, Max. Hi, Max.
So I just want to say, first of all, thank you all for being here and apologies for not being part of this. But I must say that every time I open the book in a very informal way, open it, I learn a fascinating thing that makes me laugh or smile or feel very touched, because this is my Ubuna's era too. So just realizing how connected everybody was and how helpful everybody was to everyone in that time period. So that is an overriding kind of sensation that I had when I read the book. And you must have felt it.
I felt it.
Every step of the way, because all that pilina, all that relationship that was built through that time period is remarkable. And if you look at the people who are on this list listening in, they represent the descendants of people who are woven together. So I just have to put my 2 cents in to really thank you, just for being present in the way you have been for your family.
Thank you, it's been totally my pleasure. It cost me very little, and it gave me so much more than it cost. Thank you. Appreciate your help.
And if you guests have anything.
Yes, well, we have a few guests in the audience, and I'd like to formally ask them if there's any insight that you folks want to ask novelist or author or storyteller today.
I'm curious whether some of your interviewees were nostalgic for the Hawaii that they feel no longer exists. Did you have that perspective that was shared?
A good question, Michael. Yes, so many of them were. One of the interviews I took was with Supreme Court Judge Ron Moon, who you knew. He was your mentor.
He's my mentor, yes.
And he was lamenting the loss of civility in the law. And so that's not exactly Hawaiiana, but he did give some examples of how he ran his court and expected civility. And many of the men that I interviewed and the women that I interviewed were sad about the passing of the ways. But you see, they're living it. They're still alive. They're still evolving. So whereas we're nostalgic about what came before, are we sad now that we have cell phones? Probably not so much. It's I don't know how to say it, because again, you know, I'm just watching people talk, and people are nostalgic and they're living through it. Is that? Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, audience, for being here again.
Jennifer, was there anything you remembered about working with my dad? No, she's shaking her head. Don't make me talk. Okay.
What about Mom? Anything you want to?
Yes, I think I would like to ask a question about when you were growing up with your family and you're sitting around that round table and every night. Can you share something special that happened
Yes.
in your memories?
Yes, the first thing, of course, is that Brother John was a little kid and he was throwing rice all over the place. So my mother had to put the newspaper down below to catch all the rice. I have to do a shout out to my brother there. That dining room table was a seminal part of my book. I thought, we used to call the table Big Black. And I thought, well, you know, since there's so much pressure on political correctness, I thought maybe that wouldn't be the good name of a book. But I had thought Big Black could be the name of the book, because not only did so many things happen in our lives around that table, but I interviewed most of the people came to me in my apartment at that table. And so there they are. And then many of the things that happened with the broken trust with Oz Stender, it began at that table. And business meetings that my father had entertaining his friends happened at that table. And that table seemed sort of important to me. So I had to put it in the book, right? And you like that part about families getting together and talking.
So important.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
So, excuse me. What was the juiciest thing?
Wait, hold on a second. My husband has a question. He might want to say something. Did you want to say something, Bruce Kelly? Well, his hand is raised, but
Can you hear me, Jane?
yes, I can, Bruce.
Hi, darling. How are you? Yeah, everybody. I'm the person that sleeps with Jane. And I know her very well, and I wanted to comment on going back to, I think the question kind of was, what is your magic? How do you make your interviews happen? And she kind of touched on it, but I would like to expound on that just a bit. I think Jane's magic is when she goes into an interview, immediately she creates a safe space for the person that she's with. And what I mean by that is she goes into it being in the present moment only, not bringing anything from the past or any expectations of the future, but just being in the present moment without any judgment, without any agenda or place to go. And that creates a really safe place for anybody that she interviews. And I'd also like to say that we try to practice that in our coupleship when we're together and when we sit down to do talk story with each other about ourselves, what's going on. And it's a really good way to live. I think there's a real lesson in that. If I can learn to extend that in all my relationships, that I can sit down with people without any judgment, even if they're opposed to my views or whatever, we can talk together in a safe place. And I think that's where solutions are going to end up coming from in the world today. And we just don't do that. Everybody's got their side and they're holding on to their side. And we need to just sit down and talk with each other and listen to each other. And that's my lesson for the day. I'm a preacher.
Thank you,
not,
Professor.
Yeah, professor. That's all I'm going to say. But I think that's where her magic is. And if you're interested in doing oral histories, you've got to create a safe space in order to really get a good interview.
Yes.
Bye, baby.
Thank you so much. But what is your question, Bruce? No.
My question is, when are you coming home?
I'm coming home when the job is done, Bruce. I'm living in the present moment. And like Anne asked, I will know when the time comes, and then I will come home.
If y'all don't know, she's been gone since early December. So we've been doing a lot of texting and FaceTime type stuff. So anyway, looking forward to it, darling. Enjoying this.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Any other questions from anybody?
Jane, I wanted to congratulate you on your
Chris,
success.
let me introduce you, Chris. Chris is somebody I met. This is somebody I met just through happenstance. I went out. Oh, Valerie Osipov took me out to the fish pond at Kaniwai, and Chris was there. And I met Max there as well. But Chris has become a dear friend. Thank you, Chris. What do you have to say?
Well, I wanted to congratulate you on this, bringing this to life, and it's a very important work. And I was wondering, are you going to archive some of your interviews, the entire interview somewhere, or is the book where it's going to live, or how?
Chris, that's a great question. And the answer is yes, but I don't know how. It's like I didn't know how to write the book, and then I wrote the book and figured out how. I've got thousands of pages of transcripts that have been approved and edited by the person themselves, and they are ready to go. But I don't know where to put them. I don't know who should archive them. Maybe they go on my website, but do they get a big enough audience if they do that? Maybe they go to University of Hawaii, but do they get lost in the dusty cupboard if I do that? These are live, living stories, and I want them to be accessible to people, and I don't know how to make that happen. So if anybody listening knows how to make that happen, I'm here to listen.
Excellent. I'm sure there's someone out there. I'm only good with Zoom, so it can't be me, okay?
You're good with Zoom and fish ponds.
Yeah, thanks, Chris, for being here.
Yeah.
I wanted to dive maybe into one particular story, and I see you work with so many people, from community leaders to bankers, but I want to hear, I'm going to be a future architect someday, in another life, if not this life, another life.
Cool.
So I want to hear one of your favorite stories of architecture. I think it might come from our friend from the Osipovs.
Oh, well, really, truly, the story about Osipov is that I lived in an Ossipoff house. So, you know, my brothers and sisters and I know firsthand what it's like to have the drawer that is made of wood that comes out and is not on casters and doesn't automatically close. The hamper was made of wood with little holes in it. Everything was together and placed like that. The doors were just so, KK, do you remember the louvers open and close, and we had the little winding thing. Everything was just so. And the other thing is, not only, Dawn, did we eat at the dining room table, but afterwards we would go into the living room, and many nights when we were little, mother or father would read to us. We called them mama or papa. And I would lay on their lap while they were reading and look up at the ceiling. And the ceiling of the Ossipoff house is lime bleached redwood. So it's muted, but you can see every grain of the wood. And it was like the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen. And everywhere you look in those houses, you see the wood grain because that's how he built his houses, and airflow. And so so my real experience of Ossipoff is living in that house. And in addition to that, after building the house for my parents, he and his wife became very best friends of our family. So Lynn was my mother's best friend, and I considered Val my Hawaiian grandfather. And so all the holidays, they'd come over and they'd give the best gifts. Do you remember, KK? They'd give the best gifts. We could open one gift on Christmas Eve when the Ossipoffs came. And it was always Lynn and Val's. It would be some little thing that unwound forever, or little tchotchke dolls inside. It was always something totally creative and fun. And so that's my experience. Then I had the pleasure through Valerie and my brother John of meeting Bob Liljestrand, who also lives in a Ossipoff house, which is preserved. Our house is not preserved as well at this point in its life. It was when we lived there. So being in that house was beautiful, and the view plane from up on Tantalus is magnificent. And I also talked to Dean Sakamoto, who wrote the book Hawaii Modern. So there's a lot in the book about architecture. And I think you will be a fine architect when you finally get to it, Max.
What about when you went to visit over at his place and the Ossipoff?
Oh, yes,
family?
yes. Oh, yes.
What was that like?
We would go visit at their houses. The thing about any Ossipoff house is it's completely shibui. There's no excess anywhere. Everything is very simple. Everything has a place and everything in its place. No clutter of any kind. And that's the way you're expected to live if you have an Ossipoff house. And his wife, I think she might have done the design. Valerie could tell us, Sandra could tell us, but the colors were very beautiful, muted, but they were right on your pond, Chris. And I don't really have words to say, but the dimensions of the house were so pleasing, even as a child. The doors were the right height, and the windows were the right width, and the couches were the right depth, and it just felt ergonomic before the word was even a word. Yeah.
Well, let's jump now to the world of Uncle Oz. And what was that like? Other than maybe stories outside of the Broken Trust, what was special about working with Uncle Oz?
So we are referring to Oz Stender, who was a little younger than my father, but a contemporary. And first of all, just being with Oz is comforting. He has a beautiful voice, and he tells good stories. He kind of have a high-pitched voice, and he giggles a little bit, and he's just charming to listen to. He tells good stories, so that was fun. Also, I view him as one of our elders, Kapuna, and that he would be willing to spend time with me was astounding to me. I asked him if I could take his interview, and he went, sure, and came to me at my apartment and sat at Big Black. And then he tells a story that was so heartfelt to me. He said, I was involved in this broken trust thing, and I didn't quite know what to do. It was very difficult, very trying, very stressful, very expensive. And every X day, Thursday, let's say, he would play golf with Marshall Goodsill. And afterwards, they would go to a Oahu Country Club, and they would sit And Marshall would then pull out his pad and say, now, here are all the things I think maybe you should be looking at. Marshall was not his lawyer. He'd done some research in the interim week. And he said to Oz, these are some things you might consider. Ask your lawyer about this, follow through on this, blah, blah. And Oz said, it was just like having Marshall Goodsill at his back. He said, so if you ask me to do anything, Jane, like come and do an interview and sit with you, I'm there. So whenever we go to the Windward Side, brother and I go visit, we just sit and be with them at their beautiful place. It was the honor of just being with him and passing the tradition. My father, makes me emotional. My father gave honor to Oz and supported him in a time of need. And here's Oz doing the same back to me. And then I can do this book and his transcripts. Chris, I have the transcripts of everything. I've probably spent 4 hours with Oz. Bruce and I spent hours with him too. And it's all in transcript. So his children have said, Uncle and Father, we want you to write this book. And he says, I don't want to sit down and write a book. I say, you don't need to, Oz. Got it. So it's available.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'm sure Uncle Oz is very grateful for the support, that came from. Marshall is your father.
Yes.
Okay. Mr. Goodsill.
Mr. Goodsill. And I used to go by the name of Jane M. Goodsill, but you'll notice now I go by Jane Marshall Goodsill because I wanted to be closer to my father.
So we have another question.
Okay.
What did you learn about Hawaii's history that surprised you?
Who asked that question?
That was coming from Anne.
Anne! She asks good ones, doesn't she? You can tell she's a historian. There were many things that I did not know. I didn't know the story of the Paniolo. I didn't know Hawaiian ways of doing things. Of course, you always hear about the Hawaiian cowboy, and you hear about some of their music, and you hear about their skills, and but when you actually talk to a rancher and he tells you what the cowboy does, that was very interesting to me. And of course, my cousins are ranchers in Montana, Scott Hibbert, and they're in the book. Actually, Scott's not in the book, but his son and his brother are in the book, in the ranching section. I learned a gentleness about the way that things were done. I learned about the gentleness and the fierceness that the Hawaiian culture brings with it, that has sometimes been forgotten and sometimes been remembered. Things like that. And so there were many facts that I learned, but it wasn't the facts that touched me. It was the feeling that came with them. It's hard for me to describe that, but that's the best I can answer that question.
Maybe share with us the wildest interview. Did you ever find yourself having to go,
yes. Yes. Here's my friend, John Fink. John Fink started out just as disc jockey, sweeping the floor at the radio station, worked his way up, became an announcer, and then get into TV. And he was also the voice of the Wahine, the women's basketball at University of Hawaii. So sitting with John Fink was like being at the open end of a fire hydrant. That guy has so much energy, I hardly knew what to do with it. And when we were done with about an hour and a half, hour, 40 minutes, I said, I think we're done, John. I've kind of absorbed as much as I can absorb. But he was just so full of enthusiasm. There were a few interviews where I didn't have to ask any questions, and he was one of them. I did, just because I wanted to hear my voice about 5 times. But he knew all the answers, and he had a passion, and it was so obviously captured in the interview. It was wonderful.
Okay, well, also, there are no other questions at this time, but I think, I'm going to prompt the audience again to please share something. Oh.
Max,
Yes.
I have a question.
Yes, Laurie.
Do we have time?
Yes, please.
Hi, Lori Foster.
Hey, Jane.
Long-time friends.
So I have a question about the subject of prejudice. So we laughed about it. We laughed about Mr. Sun Chu Lee and the song and the way that we thought about the different races. And it was clearly there. And I wonder how people responded to the, I mean, it was, you know, was there any animosity that was talked about how the different races were treated, or was there any embarrassment, or was it just kind of the way it was and we just accepted it and we kind of evolved to where we are now, sort of understanding that, you know, was kind of a backwards way of thinking. I just wonder how people thought back about how we treated each other in those days, because it was really there. And I just wonder how people responded to that or thought about it.
People talked about it very openly, which totally surprised me, especially talking to a Haole girl, right? I thought there'd be some holdback, but there wasn't. And so the people, the Haoles that I talked to talked about how it was unfair because of the structure at which they were at the top. The ethnicities that I talked to said they didn't like it and they found a way to survive in spite of it. And look at me now. And Raymond Tam tells a beautiful story about that. And, you know, Lori, when I started talking to people and asked about their ancestors, many of them came over as immigrant workers. And then you ask them more, and eventually, third generation down, their grandchildren are presidents and CEOs of Hawaiian corporations. So it's like, who gets the last laugh? And people talked about it very openly, and I was totally amazed. And I'm not afraid to ask that question. You know, being a therapist helps because you ask questions that usually aren't questions that are socially acceptable. Mm-hmm. And my transcriber knows, Marcia, she listened to every one of these. And sometimes I edited what we said because just to make it more readable. But I kept the hard stuff in there because I wanted to know what it was like and what it was like to have to work your way up. And of course, you know, I think with most success stories, it's, I might be getting out of my lane here, but most people said that they work damn hard. And they either persevered by dint of personality or mentors who helped them or the changing sociological times. Does that sort of answer the question?
Yeah, thank you.
Complicated question. And this was a difficult thing to address in the book. When I started, and Bruce will remember, I was going around and around, how am I going to talk about this? I don't want to offend people. I want to make it open and have this open up a dialogue. And you know, Miley, the gal who owns this store, said she would love to have people come in the future and talk about some of the things that I've opened up as discussion points from my book. You kidding? That's the most highest compliment a person could possibly get. So
thank you.
Let's set it up. Let's bring them in.
Okay then, I'm ready.
We'll bring Big Black.
Big Black.
Set it up.
Get the people to sit around and talk. Right. And you know, I don't even need to be here because these people can come and talk about what their experiences are. I mean, the door's been open. Now all we have to do is walk through.
So, yeah. Thank you, Lori, so much. Wonderful question. I watch a lot of TV, and you see book launches where they read a portion of their story. Is there anything that you want to read to the audience that goes, I gotta buy it right now?
I don't know about that. I've done my best to say, you know, Max, shall I be totally honest? I want Miley to sell a ton of these books. But this is not about selling and promoting and marketing the book. It's about sharing the stories. It's about giving something back to my community. That's what it's about. So I will read something from the epilogue. My publisher, George Engebretson, said, now you need to do an epilogue. And I said, okay, I'd be happy to. What's an epilogue? I knew nothing. So I decided I would write the epilogue as though somebody were interviewing me. And So they say, what was the hardest part of this project for you, Jane? And Jane responds, not being able to publish every word a person said. The complete interviews capture remarkable intergenerational life journeys, but oral histories, even if they are edited for readability, require a dedicated reader. It seemed wiser to harvest sections of interviews into like topics, and it was fun creating the chapters and figuring out what went into them. And then the question is, what if there is interest from your audience to read these interviews in full? Kind of what Chris asked. And I say, that would delight me. And then I answer that question. Then the next question is, and you say you do it again? Does that mean we might look forward to Voices of Hawaii Volume 2? Or as I call it, More Voices of Hawaii. And Jane Goodsill answers, I would love that. Think of how many stories are still out there to be told, and how many people for me yet to meet. I'm convinced that when people talk heart to heart, there is a bond created, and we become part of the same tribe. I want more of this in my life, and I want more of this in the world.
Beautiful. Well, I'm buying a book today.
Oh, Max, do you think, raise your hands if you think maybe I should give Max a book. There you go. Max is you're gonna get a personally inscribed book from me.
For our friends who are not here with us on the island, coming from Texas and elsewhere, where can we purchase this wonderful story?
Okay, so we can purchase this beautiful book, which I absolutely love. Just the colors and the art on it. But you can purchase it here, right here at Arts and Letters, Native Books at Arts and Letters on Nu'uanu, 1164 Nu'uanu. Or you can also go online to nativebooks.com and you can purchase a book there. And also in Naumea, Hawaii at Ward Center. So you have many options in purchasing this book. This beautiful book with a beautiful photo, I must say, of Jane. When I opened this book, Jane, I have to say, I'm like, this woman is beautiful. But meeting you in person, even more beautiful. And really, from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much for sharing and taking on this big feat of sharing and going out there and working hard. I know it wasn't easy. So thank you. I look forward to reading more stories.
Thank you, Don.
Well, I think we have one more question.
Great.
Jane, if that's okay.
Yeah.
It's coming in from Casey. Casey, I'm going to have you unmute yourself and go ahead and address us personally.
Oh, I have to introduce Casey.
Okay.
Casey and her sister, Laura, are both watching, and they are like my godchildren in Texas. I watched both of them grow up. I spent every holiday with them because I didn't have family in Texas, and they were my family. So bless you for being here.
First, thanks for that introduction. Just wanted to let you know I love you and I'm proud of you, Jane. It's wonderful, and it's wonderful to see you. And also for everyone else here, I have known Jane since I have a memory, and in fact, Jane is responsible for the very first full-length novel that I ever read. She and I read it together. It was Watership Down, and that was back when I was a kid. So Jane's the one that got me hooked on books. Jane, my question for you, and I thank you for that, is how has this project changed you?
Oh, Casey, you're going to make me cry.
You made me cry, so.
First of all, it brought me closer to my father and my mother and my family. I always thought that I didn't quite get enough of my father because he wasn't at all my tennis matches and he was in his head thinking about things, right, Jennifer? And now I know what he was thinking about. And he was thinking about making some of the changes that have helped make Hawaii the place that it is in terms of, for his clients, corporate decisions that were important and significant. So I'm very proud of him for that. Also, I've interviewed 75 people, right? I now have 75 brand new friends. And the amazing thing is, if I needed anything from any one of them, I could call them and I know they would say yes. And if they needed anything from me, and it's not like these are casual people who just run through my life one time and then I'm done. Friends. I ask how their wives are doing, and I, ask how their operation went. And, it's opened up a whole new world for me in terms of people. And then the other thing, of course, is, you make me cry. When I was about 28, I moved to the mainland, which is when I met you and Laura and your parents. And then I lived on the mainland for a long time, coming back here all the time for visits with my family. But now, I am now a part of Hawaii because I have collected the history and given it back to my community. It's very moving for me. It's the most meaningful part. Everybody's crying now. Jennifer wants to say something, my father's secretary.
Very briefly. Towards the end of his life, he would sit and just talk about stuff. I asked him one day, I might have told you this already. I said, you've handled so many wonderful transactions, changed people's lives, you manage these trusts, and you do so many wonderful things. What is your greatest accomplishment? When people look back, what do you want them to remember? What do you feel is your greatest accomplishment? And he sat for a long time and he said, my children.
Oh.
He said, my children are my greatest accomplishment. I love them and I'm proud of them. And I know he'd be so proud of you. He is proud of you today.
Thank you. My goodness, that totally brings me to tears.
I'm sorry.
I'm so glad to hear it. It's almost like I believe you and I believe he said it and I hear it from him through you. Thank you. Wow.
So the best audience with us. Thank you for being here.
The point is it's a feel-good book. I think mainly people come away feeling educated and happy. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, so honored to have all of you listening.